The winter sun hung low over the small mountain settlement, its pale light struggling to warm the muddy ground where traders and trappers gathered each month. It wasn't a festive market, more of a necessary exchange of goods before the snows sealed the mountain passes. People moved briskly, heads down, eager to finish their business and retreat to their fires. But today, an uneasy tension rippled through the crowd, making folks pause, glance over his shoulders, whisper. Elias Boone felt it the moment he stepped into the clearing. He wasn't a man who visited town often, maybe once every few months, for flour, salt, bullets, and letters that never came. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wrapped in a heavy fur coat, he moved like a mountain among smaller men, quiet, enduring, impossible to ignore. Folks gave him space out of respect and a little fear. Elias liked it that way, but even he couldn't ignore what was happening in the center of the clearing. A drunken trader stood wobbling on a crate, shouting into the crisp mountain air. His coat was shabby, his hands stained with drink and dirt, and beside him, shivering thin, her wrists bound in front of her, stood a young woman. Her dress was torn at the hem, shoes barely holding together, hair tangled from days of travel. Her face, though smudged with dust, carried a look of stubborn defiance. She wasn't crying, she wasn't begging, but her jaw was clenched so tightly Elias could see the tension from where he stood. $2. The trader slurred, waving a piece of paper in one hand. She owes me for board, transport, and meals. $2, and she's yours. People turned away, ashamed to watch but too scared to interfere. They muttered, excuses, not my business. Don't want trouble. Ain't worth crossing a man like that. Elias watched in silence. The girl didn't look defeated. She looked resigned, as if this humiliation was only the latest in a long string of wrongs. Her eyes scanned the crowd, maybe searching for a familiar face, maybe looking for mercy. She found neither. Come on, the trader shouted again. $2. I ain't got all day. Elias felt a slow burn rise in his chest. Not anger, he'd long buried that, but something heavier, something he didn't have a name for. He stepped forward. The crowd parted instantly, murmuring as he passed. Elias didn't pay them any mind. His boots left deep prints in the cold mud. His jaw was set, eyes fixed on the trader, who suddenly straightened like a man sobering in a single breath. Elias stopped in front of the crate. He looked from the trader to the girl, whose eyes widened slightly at the sight of him. He didn't blame her. He was a rough-looking man, long hair, beard thick, hands scarred from years of trapping and chopping wood. But she didn't flinch. Not once. You say $2, Elias said, his voice low, steady. But trader swallowed. That's right. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out 2 coins. He didn't toss them. He didn't slam them down. He simply held them out, palm open, as if offering a choice instead of making a transaction. The trader snatched the money and stepped back quickly. Afraid to meet Elias's eyes, Elias turned to the woman. You're coming with me, he said. Not commanding, informing. For a heartbeat, she stood completely still. The cold wind tugged at her hair. Her bound hands trembled, but her gaze did not. Then she nodded. Not because she belonged to him, but because, in that moment, he was the only one who had stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. And that changed everything. The moment Mara stepped down from the crate, the world felt strangely muffled, as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Elias stood beside her, silent as stone, his presence towering yet oddly steadying. He didn't grab her or push her forward. He simply reached out and cut the rope, binding her wrists with a small, wickedly sharp hunting knife. The release felt like a gasp she'd been holding for days. You hurt? He asked, his voice low and gravelly, like a man unused to speaking. She shook her head, though her wrists were raw and her feet ached from miles of walking behind the trader's wagon. Elias turned without another word and motioned for her to follow. She hesitated, not because she feared him but because she didn't understand him. Men who paid for women rarely offered freedom first. Yet this stranger, this mountain of a man, had cut her ropes before even asking her name. He led her to a sturdy-looking mule, hitched beside a pile of supplies. A quiet creature, brown with intelligent eyes. Elias loaded a small satchel onto its back, tightened straps, then turned to her. You ride, he said. I can walk, she replied instinctively, too accustomed to being treated like labor. His brow furrowed slightly, not with anger but confusion. Mountains are steep, long road. You ride. He said it as though it were obvious, as though only a fool would argue. Mara wasn't sure if she wanted to smile or cry at the simple logic of it. Before she could decide, Elias lifted her gently, carefully onto the mule, as though she were something fragile. Then he took the lead rope and began walking. They left the settlement behind quickly, the noise fading into the sharp, clean quiet of mountain wilderness. Tall pines swayed above them, their branches whispering like old spirits. Snow clung stubbornly to the higher slopes, and the deeper they climbed, the colder the air grew. Mara wrapped her thin shawl tighter, but it did little to stop the chill. Elias noticed. Without stopping, he shrugged off his heavy wool coat and handed it up to her. She blinked in surprise. I can't take this. You'll freeze. His expression didn't change. Already used to the cold, but it ain't a debate. He met her eyes briefly, steady and unreadable. Put it on, something in his tone not harsh, but Firm told her refusing would be foolish. She slipped into the coat. It swallowed her whole, warm and smelling faintly of pine, smoke, and something she couldn't place. Something safe. They continued in silence. Mara watched Elias as he navigated the narrow mountain trail. He walked with the confidence of a man who knew every rock and tree. Despite his size, he moved quietly, almost carefully, as though he feared startling the world around him. For hours, the only sounds were crunching snow, the mule's soft grunts, and Elias's steady breathing. Finally, Mara ventured a question. Why? Why did you take me? He didn't answer right away. In fact, she thought he might ignore her completely. But after several moments, he said, didn't like what was happening down there. That's all. He shrugged one shoulder. Did it need to be more? She didn't know what to say to that. Men always wanted something, always expected something in return. But Elias spoke like someone doing a chore, simple, necessary, nothing owed. As the sun dipped lower, painting the mountains in gold and purple, Mara's exhaustion deepened. She swayed in the saddle, fighting sleep. Elias noticed instantly. We'll stop soon, he said. Cabin's close. A cabin, a roof, a fire. Safety may be temporary, may be fragile, but more safety than she'd had in years. For the first time since her world fell apart, Mara let herself breathe. Elias Boone may have bought her for $2, but with every quiet, gentle step he took into the mountains, she wondered if he intended to give her back something far more valuable, her humanity. The trail wound upward for another hour, growing steeper and narrower until Mara wondered how anyone could live in a place so far removed from the world. The air thinned, crisp and biting, and snow thickened along the path. Just as her hands began trembling from cold and fatigue, Elias finally spoke. We're here. Mara lifted her head from where she'd been leaning forward on the mule's neck. Through the trees, tucked against a rocky hillside, stood a cabin small, sturdy, and unmistakably meant for one person. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, rising into the twilight air. A heavy wooden door, a single window, and piles of chopped firewood stacked precisely along the side completed the picture of a life carefully managed in isolation. Elias led the mule to a hitching post, then helped Mara down. Her legs wobbled from the long ride, and she grabbed his forearm for balance. His arm felt like solid granite, moving steady, strangely reassuring. He offered no comment as she steadied herself, simply opened the cabin door and motioned her inside. The warmth hit her like a soft embrace. A fire burned low in the stone hearth. The cabin was simple but tidy. A long table, 2 chairs, shelves stacked with jars and tools, a narrow bed tucked into the far corner, and a worn bearskin rug spread across the floor. Everything had the look of being used by a single set of hands for a very long time. Mara stood in the doorway, uncertain. Elias brushed past her, set down a sack of supplies, and knelt to poke the fire, coaxing it into a brighter glow. Sit, he said. She perched on the edge of a chair, clutching his coat around her like armor. Despite the warmth of the room, she shivered more from nerves than cold. Men in her past had taught her that comfort often came with a price. Elias didn't look at her as he moved around the room, removing his gear, hanging up the mule's harness, putting things in their respective places. Only after everything was in order did he face her. You eat soup? He asked. The question startled her. Yes, of course. He nodded once, as though satisfied with this small compatibility, and ladled stew from a pot simmering near the fire. He placed a bowl in front of her, then stepped away to fetch his own. She didn't touch it at first. Instinct warned her to wait until she understood the rules of the place she now found herself. Elias sat across from her, picked up his spoon, and began eating in slow, quiet bites. No demands, no expectations, no lingering looks. Mara's shoulders loosened by a fraction. She raised her spoon. The stew was simple potatoes, rabbit, herbs, but warm and filling. It thawed something deep inside her. You can sleep in the bed, Elias said suddenly. The spoon froze halfway to her mouth. What? He pointed toward the small bed in the corner. You take it. I'll sleep by the fire. Her breath caught. I can take the floor. He shook his head. You've had enough of the floor. I think she wasn't sure how he knew that, or why. It made her throat tighten. Elias finished his meal, stood, and began clearing the dishes, not hers, just his. It was almost as though he didn't want to make her feel beholden, as though he were trying to build a fragile kind of space around her, one where she wouldn't flinch. Mara watched him move, this silent, solitary man who lived at the edge of the world. Everything about him said he expected nothing from her. Not kindness, not conversation, not payment. And that confused her more than cruelty ever had. After a long pause, she whispered, Why are you being gentle? Elias paused with his back to her. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, he said, Because someone should have been. Long before, now. Mara felt her heartbeat falter. In a cabin built for one, she began to realize something startling. Elias Boone might have brought her up the mountain as a stranger, but he wasn't planning to keep her as one. The first morning in Elias's cabin greeted Mara with the gentle crackle of a fire and the sharp scent of pine resin. She blinked awake, slowly, wrapped in a thick quilt that smelled faintly of smoke and snow. For a moment, disoriented and half-dreaming, she thought she was still somewhere she needed to escape. Then she noticed Elias. He sat on the floor by the hearth, legs stretched out, boots half unlaced, sharpening a knife with slow, steady movements. He wasn't watching her. He wasn't looming. He was simply there, quiet, grounded, giving her space without needing to be told. She swallowed. "Did you sleep there all night?" He nodded. "You didn't have to." His eyes flicked up briefly. It was warm enough. Mara didn't argue. She had the instinctive feeling he wouldn't know what to do if she thanked him too much or if she tried to repay him somehow. Instead, she rose slowly and folded the quilt, laying it neatly at the end of the bed. It was a small gesture, but it felt important to show she wasn't ungrateful. Elias noticed. He didn't say a word, but something in his expression softened, like frost melting on a window. When she tried to take over the morning chores, fetching water, gathering wood, Elias held up a hand. "You ain't working." Mara blinked. "I'm not resting while you do everything." "It ain't work," he replied simply, picking up the pail. "Just living." The words struck her deeper than expected. In her old life, everything had been work, backbreaking, thankless, always demanded by someone else. No one had ever acted like basic tasks were part of survival, part of routine, rather than a debt she owed. Still, she wasn't a woman to sit idle. While Elias tended to the animals and chopped a fresh pile of wood, she moved quietly around the cabin, straightening blankets, arranging his haphazard shelves, sweeping under the table. She wasn't sure if he'd mind, but she needed to do something, anything, to feel less like a burden. When he came back inside, brushing snow from his shoulders, he paused. The cabin was still simple, still rough around the edges, but cleaner. Lived in, but not lonely. "You do all that?" he asked. Mara braced herself. "Yes, I hope you don't mind." Elias shook his head. "Looks better this way." A flicker of pride warmed her chest. Later, while Elias sorted through traps he needed to repair before winter truly settled in, Mara wandered to the window. Beyond the glass, the world stretched in white-coated silence. Tall pines swayed gently, their branches shimmering with frost. The mountains loomed like guardians, majestic, indifferent, eternal. She hugged Elias's coat tighter around herself. "It's beautiful up here," she murmured. He glanced up. "Didn't think you'd like it." She turned toward him. "Why not?" He hesitated. Elias Boone was not a man skilled in explanations. Words didn't come easy to him. Finally he said, "Most folks don't want to be this far from everything." Mara looked at the snow-hushed world again. "Everything hasn't been very kind to me." That gave him pause. After a long, thoughtful silence, Elias stood. "Come on, show you something." He led her outside to a clearing behind the cabin. The sun pierced the treetops, casting gold across untouched snow. In the distance, a frozen stream wound through the forest like a silver ribbon. He pointed toward faint tracks in the snow, hoof prints, small and delicate. "Deer pass through here most mornings. If you listen, you'll hear." Mara closed her eyes and, for the first time in a long while, listened. The wind whispered. Ice crackled. A soft, rustle light, graceful moved through the trees. Her lips parted in wonder. I never heard nature sound like this." Elias watched her quietly, something like a smile tugging at his mouth. "Up here," he said, "you get to breathe." She felt it, then a small, tentative sense of safety settling into her bones. Not certainty, not trust, not yet, but something close, something growing, one gentle step at a time. And Elias, with his rough hands and quiet patience, seemed determined to give her the space to find herself again. The wind began to howl by late afternoon, low and mournful like a wounded beast, roaming the ridges. Mara had heard storms before, but nothing like the fury rolling down the mountains now. The sky darkened early, swallowing what little warmth the sun had offered. By dusk, snow whipped past the windows in wild, frantic swirls. Elias checked the shutters twice, then a third time. "Storm's settling in," he said, voice firm but calm. "Might be a day, might be 3. Mara nodded, pulling the quilt tighter around her shoulders. The cabin felt smaller, suddenly not cramped, but intimate. Its wooden walls holding them close together whether they were ready for it or not. Elias wasn't a talker on normal days, and the storm didn't change him much. He moved around the cabin with careful deliberation, feeding the fire, setting extra wood beside it, preparing a pot of stew so thick it could feed them for days. Mara watched him from her place near the hearth. Something about storms always brought back memories, ones she'd rather bury under snow as deep as the drifts outside. Finally, Elias glanced at her, studying the tension in her shoulders. "Storm frightens you." She shook her head. "Not the storm, just being shut in." His brow lifted slightly. "With me?" Mara hesitated, then shook her head again. "With anyone." The fire crackled softly between them. Elias didn't press. Instead, he ladled stew into 2 bowls and handed one to her. She accepted it with a grateful nod. As they ate, silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable, but waiting for something real. When she'd finished half the bowl, Mara set it down. The storm beat harder against the cabin, rattling the shutters like angry fists. She swallowed. The words hovered on her tongue, fragile and unsure. "You should know. The man you bought me from, he wasn't my husband." Or family. I wasn't with him by choice. Ilias's jaw tightened. Didn't think you were. She looked up sharply. You didn't? He shook his head, slow and certain. You don't carry yourself like someone who belongs to a man like that. The warmth of the fire suddenly felt too close. Mara looked down at her hands, still faintly marked from the rope he had cut 2 days ago. Her voice trembled despite her efforts. I lost everything after my parents died. A neighbor took me and wasn't kind. Her breath shuddered. When I ran, the trader found me. Said I owed him for food, shelter, the road. I didn't owe him anything, but no one ever listened. Elias was completely still. Not stiff, not shocked, just listening, as if every word mattered. People look at me, she whispered, and they don't see someone worth fighting for. I did. The simple truth of it struck her harder than she expected. She blinked fast, her vision blurring. Elias continued quietly, men like him, they thrive on folks staying silent. Someone should have stepped in long before I did. A long, aching quiet settled between them. Then Mara breathed out slowly, gathering courage she didn't know she had. What about you? Why live all the way up here? His gaze shifted toward the window, where the storm raged. Wasn't my plan at first. His voice lowered. Lost someone, not by death, by choice, she left. Took my faith in people with her. Mara's heart clenched. Not jealousy, just understanding. That particular kind of abandonment left a scar nothing could fully erase. I'm sorry, she murmured. Elias nodded once. Life's simpler up here. Quiet, easier to breathe, without someone breaking you again. Mara felt that truth settle inside her. She knew what it was to be broken, to hide, to fear, but inside this cabin, with snow pounding the world silent, she realized something startling. She didn't feel afraid of Elias. Not his size, not his silence, not his strength. In fact, his presence felt like safety she'd never known. The storm outside raged on, but within the cabin, something gentler stirred, a fragile thread of trust, spun in the quiet between two bruised souls. The storm passed overnight, leaving behind a world transformed. Still, glittering beneath a cold morning sun, Mara stepped outside first, her boots sinking into the fresh snow with a soft crunch. The air was sharp and clean, filling her lungs in a way that almost felt like a new beginning. Elias joined her a moment later, fastening his coat. Need to check the traps, he said. Snow's fresh, it'll slow down predators. Mara nodded. She had grown used to his short sentences, the way he spoke only what needed saying. She hadn't realized until now how comforting honesty could be when it wasn't tied to cruelty. I'll come, she offered. Elias hesitated, not dismissing her, but weighing her safety. It's steep in places. I can manage. A faint glimmer of approval flickered in his eyes. Stay close. Then, they set off along the narrow trail that wound deeper into the forest behind the cabin. The trees sparkled with ice, and their breath misted in the cold air. Elias walked ahead, breaking the path through the snow, while Mara followed in his footprints. The quiet felt peaceful at first. Birds called faintly in the distance, and the forest creaked with the weight of ice. But as they climbed higher, Mara noticed the terrain shifting, rocks jutting through the snow. The path narrowing along a steep slope. Elias moved with confident ease, but Mara stumbled more than once. Careful, he murmured over his shoulder. Ice under the snow. She nodded, focusing on her steps. They reached the first trap, a small game snare, still empty. Elias examined it, reset it, and moved on. At the second, he crouched again, checking the mechanism. Mara stayed back slightly, scanning the white forest. You always do this alone? She asked. Always. Doesn't it get lonely? He shrugged. Better lonely than hurt. Her heart twisted at that thought, but before she could respond, the peaceful silence snapped. A sharp crack like a branch breaking echoed through the trees. Ilias's head jerked up. Get back, he ordered, voice suddenly fierce. Mara froze, unsure what danger he sensed. Then she saw it. The snow beneath his feet had shifted. The slope ahead, heavy with ice, trembled the way earth does just before it gives way. Ilias, too late. The ground collapsed under him with a violent rush. Snow and ice slid downward in a sheet, dragging him with it. His body disappeared over the edge. Mara screamed, sprinting forward until her knees hit the snowy ground. She saw him 10 feet below, half buried in white, one arm twisted badly under him. He wasn't moving. Elias? She cried, her voice cracking. He groaned faintly, eyelids fluttering. Stay back. She ignored the warning. Slowly, carefully, she climbed down the broken slope, digging her boots into the snow and gripping tree roots for support. Her hands shook, her breath came in bursts, but she reached him. His face was pale with pain. Leg, maybe broke, he muttered. Don't talk, she said, her voice trembling but steady. Let me see. She brushed snow away from his body, checking for bleeding. His leg was bent unnaturally, and his shoulder looked dislocated. Panic clawed at her chest, but she forced it down. Elias had kept her alive since she arrived. Now it was her turn. Hold on to me, she whispered. With surprising strength, she got his arm over her shoulders. Elias gritted his teeth as she lifted, pushing upward with every ounce of determination she possessed. Inch by inch, breath by breath, they climbed back up the slope. Mara slipped twice, cried out once, but she never let go. By the time they reached the trail, Elias was trembling with pain. Mara wiped her face. She didn't know if it was sweat or tears and took a deep breath. I'm getting you home. And she did. Slowly, stubbornly, she dragged and guided him back through the forest, refusing to stop, no matter how heavy he felt or how her muscles screamed. When they finally crossed the cabin threshold, Elias collapsed onto the floor, gasping. Mara knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she tended to his wounds. Elias watched her through half-lidded eyes, pain-clouded but filled with something deep: astonishment, gratitude, maybe even the first flicker of trust. You saved me, he murmured. She swallowed hard. You saved me first. For the first time since she'd met him, Elias reached out hesitantly and brushed her hand with his fingers, not a claim, not a demand, a thank you. And in that touch, something undeniable bloomed between them, a bond forged not in fear, but in courage, care, and the moment they realized they desperately needed one another. The storm broke before dawn, rolling across the plains like a living thing, growling, tearing at the sky, shaking the windows of the ranch house. Claire woke to the sound of thunder, sharp and angry, as if the world itself were cracking open. For a moment, she lay still, listening. The wind rattled the shutters, hail struck the tin roof like thrown stones, and underneath it all, nothing. No small voice, no little footsteps, no quiet humming that usually drifted through the hall at sunrise. She sat up fast. Emmy. Claire shoved aside the quilts and stepped into the hallway, calling softly at first, Emmy, sweetheart. Silence. Her heartbeat climbed into her throat. She checked the girl's room: empty. The bed was tousled, blankets kicked aside, but the window was shut and locked. Claire hurried to the kitchen next, the living room, then the mudroom, each one empty. The clock on the wall read a little past 6. Emmy always woke early. She always padded toward Claire with sleepy eyes and hair in a wild tumble. This silence felt wrong. Then Claire saw it: the back door, not fully latched, swaying with every push of the wind. She grabbed it, the cold rushing over her skin like icy breath. It hadn't been open long, but long enough. Her stomach dropped. She didn't think, she didn't breathe. She just grabbed her coat, pulled on her boots without socks, and stepped into the storm. The air stung her cheeks. The land stretched out in broken gray and swirling white as the wind cut at her like a blade. She cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted, Emmy. Her voice was swallowed whole. Claire forced herself down the steps and into the yard. Snow clung to everything: the fence posts, the troughs, the barn roof already dusted white. She scanned for small footprints, anything, but the storm was blowing sideways, erasing everything as quickly as it fell. Where would she go? But barn. Emmy loved the barn, loved the horses, loved the quiet. Claire dashed toward it, head down, coat whipping behind her. The wooden doors groaned when she yanked them open, and warm breath and soft whinnies greeted her. The animals stirred restlessly. But no little girl. Claire felt the first sting of tears. Her throat tightened painfully. She leaned against a stall door and forced herself to think. Emmy was brave but gentle, curious but cautious. She wouldn't wander without reason. And then Claire remembered a conversation from 2 nights ago. Emmy's soft voice asking, Do you think Mama can hear me from the hill? The one with the tall tree, the lookout hill, where James used to take her. Claire's heart stuttered. The hill was a quarter-mile away, high, exposed, dangerous, even in mild weather, deadly in a storm. She stepped back outside. The wind nearly shoved her, but she squared her shoulders. For Emmy, she would walk through fire, ice, the end of the world itself. Claire pushed forward, one step, then another, the snow gathering around her boots. She fought the gusts, slipping, catching herself. Every few minutes she shouted Emmy's name, her voice raw and cracking. Halfway across the field she stumbled, catching her knee on a hidden rock beneath the snow. Pain shot up her leg, sharp enough to steal her breath. She stayed down only long enough to grit her teeth and stand again. Emmy was out here somewhere, scared, cold, alone. And Claire, who had once convinced herself she didn't deserve to be anyone's mother, now felt her entire soul twisting at the thought of losing her. She kept climbing. The hill rose ahead, dark against the storm. Claire's breath came in gasps now, each one scraping her throat. Her fingers burned with cold. Her hair whipped around her eyes. But then a shape, small, curled at the base of the old tree. Claire's knees nearly buckled. She forced herself forward, slipping, crawling the last few feet. And then she saw her, Emmy, huddled, shivering violently, clutching something close to her chest. Claire didn't realize she was crying until her tears froze on her cheeks. Emmy, she whispered, reaching out with trembling hands. The little girl lifted her head. Her lips were blue, her eyes glassy. Emmy, Mama, wanted to tell her. Claire gathered her into her arms, pulling her close, wrapping her coat around her small body. I've got you, sweetheart. You're safe. I'm here. And for the first time, Emmy didn't just cling, she trusted. The storm eased by mid-morning, leaving the world blanketed in white silence. But inside the house, the fire roared bright and angry in the hearth, as though it were determined to chase every last shadow of cold from the walls. Claire sat on the couch with Emmy wrapped snugly in thick quilts, her small body tucked tightly into Claire's chest. The little girl hadn't let go since Claire carried her home. Not once. James hovered nearby like a man caught between relief and terror. His hands trembled even when he tried to hide them by stuffing them in his coat pockets. Every few seconds his gaze flicked to Emmy, tracing her face, checking her breaths, as though reassuring himself she was truly there. The doctor, a man with weathered cheeks and a voice like gravel, closed his bag after finishing his examination. "She'll be fine," he said, cold and shaken. "But you got to her in time." James let out a sound that was half breath, half prayer. "Thank God." The doctor nodded toward Claire. "You should thank her too. Another 10 minutes out there, and things might have gone differently. She saved your girl." James turned, his eyes locking onto Claire. There was relief there, and something deeper, something that sent a strange ache through Claire's chest. The doctor left soon after, leaving quiet behind him. A soft, almost sacred quiet. Claire smoothed a hand through Emmy's tangled hair. "How's your head, sweetheart?" Emmy nodded weakly. Her voice was still small, but steadier now. "I'm okay, Mama." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward, touching everything. Claire froze. James froze. The whole room seemed to lean into that tiny word. "Mama," Emmy whispered again, nestling closer, as though it had always been the name she meant to use, as though it hadn't just rewritten the entire shape of their little world. Claire's breath caught, her eyes burned. She didn't trust herself to speak. She just held the child tighter, pressing a kiss to her forehead and letting silent tears slip into her hair. James knelt in front of them, resting his hand over Emmy's small one. "Sweet girl," he murmured, "why did you go out there?" Emmy sniffled. "I wanted to tell Mama I miss her. The other Mama, the one in heaven." She turned her head slowly toward Claire. "But I have a Mama right here now, and I wanted her to know too." Claire's heart shattered and mended in the same beat. James swallowed hard. "You scared us." "I'm sorry," Emmy whispered, "but I knew Mama would find me." Claire blinked rapidly. You did." Emmy nodded. "You came looking the first night we met. You always come looking." James's gaze flicked to Claire, warm and breaking all at once. Something in him softened now. It settled, like a man finally understanding the truth he'd been circling for weeks. He stood slowly, then reached out a hand for Claire. "Come here," she hesitated. But he shook his head and gently pulled her to her feet, careful not to wake Emmy, who remained wrapped in the quilt but nuzzled against Claire's shoulder. James looked at them, at the woman who had just saved his child, at the child who had chosen her without hesitation, and his voice turned low and steady. "I think we both knew how this would end." Claire's pulse tripped at James. He stepped closer, brushing his thumb along her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't felt fall. "You're the reason my little girl is alive. You're the woman she calls Mama, and you're the one I've been falling in love with since the day you walked onto this ranch." Claire's breath trembled, the world narrowing to his eyes, his warmth, the sincerity in every syllable. "She's our girl now," he whispered. "If you'll stay." Claire's voice cracked when she whispered back, "I don't want to be anywhere else." James leaned his forehead gently against hers, and Emmy, still half asleep, murmured contentedly between them. And in that small, firelit room, with storm clouds drifting away outside and the world turning quiet again, a family finally found its shape.